welcome. Hopefully everybody's been able to connect for the first of our 5-part webinar series today. Thank you for taking the time to join us. And as I mentioned, this is the first of our 5-part series, which we're running instead of the Red Meat event, which would normally operate around the AGM at this time of year. And we don't need to spend any time talking about how challenging it's been for everybody in the last little while, and this is one of the things that we're doing to respond to the changes and the inability of us to be able to get together in large groups. So hopefully today's seminar or webinar will be beneficial, as the other ones will be as well. So welcome to the Redefining Resilience through Producer Innovation webinar. Producer adoption's a really key focus of MLA's new 5-year strategic plan. We're about 4 months into the first year of that plan now, and adoption's taken a much more significant position in the plan and in our activities going forward. So the adoption program assists MLA to meet our goals and our purpose around fostering the prosperity of the red meat industry, and it's also one of the things that contributes to prospering or enhancing the resilience of the Australian red meat and livestock industry as well. We do this through building the capability of producers and advisors to be able to increase on-farm productivity and profitability from the application of the research and development that we invest in on behalf of and with our various stakeholders and levy payers. So today we'll hear from Mick Crowley. Mick's the MLA General Manager of Research, Development and Adoption, who's facilitating today's webinar, and he'll also speak about MLA's adoption strategy. Sarah Strachan. Sarah's the MLA Group Manager of Adoption and Commercialisation, and she'll tell us how adoption strategies foster producer innovation. Hamish Chandler is MLA's Program Manager for Genetics. He'll discuss how genetics investments have built resilience in the red meat industry. And then Professor Phil Vercoe from the University of Western Australia will talk to us about accelerating adoption through strategic partnerships. As today's session is a webinar, your microphones will automatically be muted and your cameras are off. But at the end of today's session, there'll be an opportunity for questions as part of the Q&A panel session. But to ask or put a question forward, you simply type the question into the Q&A feature on the Zoom toolbar. So if you can't see that, you just need to tap the screen, the toolbar will come up and you'll find a Q&A feature there. And you can just type your question into the toolbar. And we may not have time to answer all of those questions during the session. So please keep please keep an eye out on the MLA Updates website, which is updates.mla.com.au, where we'll publish the remaining answers along with the recording of today's session in the coming days. If unfortunately there's any major technical difficulty from our end and we lose connection, we'll close the meeting and email you another link straight away that we can commence as soon as we can from where we left off. But we're expecting everything to go smoothly. So I'll hand over to Mick Crowley to facilitate today's session for you.
Thanks very much, Jason, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's session. Look, there's no doubt that we've seen some really tough times over the last few years, and when we're talking about resilience, I think it's really important for us to recognise that resilience is at the core of everything that we do. As livestock producers, we know that you're resilient. You've worked through flood, fire, drought. We're all working through the COVID situation. But what the theme of these webinars is about is looking at how do we use that inbuilt resilience to take us further? How do we now look at innovation coming out the other side of these challenges and learning and strengthening ourselves for the future? So I think when we do that, we're really looking at how do we make sure that that we're really setting ourselves up for success. Just having a just very small technical difficulty there. But when we're looking at resilience, we are certainly looking at a whole farm system and really making sure we're taking a value chain approach to everything that we do. So the way in which we can really extract value out of our R&D investments is really driving those changes and being very focused on producer priorities, really focused on productivity and really looking at outcomes. We also can work much better along the supply chain. So when we think about not just starting with the right animals, breeding, feeding, finishing, but connecting then to what our customers want and ultimately delivering better results for our consumers. Equally, we can collect the insights from our consumers. We can package that up in terms of, I expect that we'll see changes in the way brand specifications work, the way in which then market signals flow, and we get the feedback back to producers, allowing the production system to respond. I think that's equally important, regardless of whether you're supplying domestic production, whether you're in a live export supply chain. Think about how we connect with our customer and understanding how we need to evolve as an industry. So when we're looking at how we invest in not only our R&D but adoption, our R&D investments are only going to be as good as how effective we are at driving those productivity changes. So we then need to look at aligning the way we invest with those priorities. So we've set up over the last 5 years, we've been working with the research advisory councils across Australia and the producer committees to develop up those priorities. What we're changing is the way we then invest. And if I just use the Northern Breeder business and sheep reproduction strategic partnerships that we're getting off the ground, it starts to look at how do we collaboratively develop those priorities, and moving away from a competitive tender for the work, we can come up with better solutions if we've got all of the right people from along the supply chain, connecting producers with our researchers, having a shorter pathway to adoption, and addressing those big complex challenges collectively as an industry. We've learned from some of the other strategic partnerships that we've developed over the last few years, and the Livestock Productivity Partnership is one of them, where we've had a collaborative approach to R&D, and that partnership has aligned itself to the priorities that have come out of our consultation process as well. We can now run those investments to ground by connecting and getting the balance between R&D and adoption investment. The other key consortium approach that we've taken is through the genetics program. We'll hear more from Hamish shortly, but really making a material difference in how we connect genetics to the rest of the supply chain. We've seen the priorities for those investments change and making a connection from genetics through to eating quality. So it really is an exciting time where we can scale our investment, get the balance right, and the balance might be and will be more in the favour of adoption, and our investments will certainly be ramped up in that adoption space, but only where we know that we can get and drive those benefits. So that's enough from me for the moment. As Jason mentioned, I'll facilitate the Q&A at the end of the speakers, and so please add the questions into the Q&A, and I'll facilitate those. But it's I guess off the basis of how we're going to invest, it's important now, and Sarah Strawn will take you through how we will actually implement and measure the benefits of really putting more energy and effort into the adoption program. So Sarah, I'll hand over to you, and yeah, take us through your section. Thank you.
Thanks, Mick. Well, I'm actually going to go into a little bit of detail now about those adoption strategies that you were talking about. Specifically, I'm actually going to talk about an approach we're taking called involve and partner. Really, more simply, what I mean is how do we get long-term commitment on getting practice change? And the reason I've chosen this area to spend some time on today is these are really the activities that we feel that are going to accelerate the ability to get access to the research outcomes and embed them into commercial businesses by having producers embedded in our research as we develop it. So when I say involve and partner, I just want to talk through what does that actually mean on the ground. And so I really am talking about the crux of this is embedding producers and stakeholders into research design, but having adoption, a clear line of sight to adoption. Sorry, my slides are not showing. Sorry, 1 second. It should be working now. Sorry. So what we're talking about is having producers involved in research from the very start and having a very clear line of sight to adoption from the very beginning of any research project. So examples of how we're doing this are having small focused groups of producers that share a common interest in whether it's an issue or an opportunity in their region or for their types of businesses, coming together to then demonstrate to each other and to other producers in a community or in a region, how does research come out of the trial and actually into practice. Those producers are then supported through a network of coaches, just like a sporting coach really, in that these coaches, and there's a network that MLA works with to help facilitate the discussions between producers, tease out the learnings that are coming out of these demonstrations, and also how do we measure if that's been impactful. These coaches also have on tap support, if you like, from subject matter experts who know the science and the research and can help implement it commercially, but also give us the measurements or tools to measure how impactful this work has been. Now, the issues or opportunities that are really regional based or coming through our consultation with producers are being turned into training packages as well. These customized training packages. And when I say training package, we do have one-day workshops on offer, but what I'm talking about here is a longer-term commitment to becoming upskilled in a certain area or opportunity. And for example, a 12-month commitment to a training program supported with a coach in these small groups of producers to come and learn about the research outcomes, go away and apply it into business and come back and share the learnings and so on. And the other part of this involve and partner approach is working in partnership with producer groups, might be state departments, stakeholder groups, to come up with some customized projects. And you might hear these called integrated research and adoption projects, where we're building, answering a question that's of a concern or an opportunity in a region, and building a research and adoption program around that in a particular region. And the most important part of that is it's research and adoption intertwined together from the very beginning. Now, I just want to share with you, well, what does that look like? What's actually happening around Australia right now when we talk about those types of activities? So producer demonstration sites, or PDS, what you might hear is a common term you might hear, is the way that these small groups of producers coming together challenge the status quo by testing out or validating some research and see if it makes a difference to their business. At the end of the financial year, we had 60 active projects in this space that covered over 300 sites around Australia. And there were hundreds of producers who were involved in actually doing the demonstration. And there were thousands of producers that were involved in observing that. So whether that's coming to field days or paddock walks and watching others demonstrate the work. The longer term training packages that I spoke about, and they come under the umbrella of profitable grazing systems, which you may have heard as well. So that's an umbrella for training packages that are developed to address a particular issue or opportunity in a region. Now there's 25 of those available now, and they continue to develop as we look at new opportunities. And they are supported by 20 coaches right now. And at the end of financial year, there were 33 groups active in this. And that's over 500 producers had made that commitment to go into these longer term packages. Now, the integrated research and adoption projects I spoke about, this is the part that also gets me really excited. And there's 9 of these projects that are up and going now, and lots more coming through the pipeline. What gets me excited about this is when I show you this picture of how much coverage or impact these projects are looking to have. And as you can see, there's not much left of Australia that's not involved in one of these projects, and more of that will be filled in as we continue to develop these projects. I just want to bring this to life just a little bit more using a specific example, and I'm going to use the example of the opportunity to improve sheep reproduction and lift lamb survival rates. And it's a common theme that's come out of our producer consultation process, that if we can get this right, if we can improve this, it really is going to make a difference to bottom line of businesses. So if that's the opportunity and we set a goal to reduce lamb mortality, how do we do this in a really efficient and effective way? And Mick's touched on the strategic partnerships, but I'm just going to delve a little bit more into that sheep reproduction strategic partnership as an example of a cohesive and efficient, effective way to bring together research and adoption together. So that strategic partnership, through the consultation with our research advisory councils, has identified that 3 main pillars of this to achieve this would be we're looking for investments that will look at best practice management, and I mean might be about paddock design, or it might be nutritional management. Human social factors, so looking at, well, what are the barriers to adopting some of the research that's been done to date, or new research, and how do we get the most out of new or existing technologies like pregnancy scanning, electronic ID. Now, the most important part about this partnership and these pillars is that they'll all be intertwining research and adoption at the same time. So as we learn through the projects and learnings out of that, they'll be supported by these awareness adoption activities at the same time. So by that, I mean awareness activities. You'll hear about these things through activities like meetup forums that will start in Southern Australia next year. It might be through various communications campaigns. Moving through to this information will get updated into our programs, the short-term programs like Bred Well, Fed Well and Edge Network, through to the involve and partner opportunities that I've spoken about already. And in particular, for example, the Profitable Grazing Systems program already has a lifting lamb survival training package, and will support this strategic partnership with producer demonstration sites and the like. Now, I'm just going to go through into a little bit more detail because I want to show you some real tangible examples of where this works and why we've chosen to speak about it today. And producer demonstration sites is the example I'm going to use today. And I'm going to use 2 examples of projects that recently finished in the last 12 months. Now, this first example is one of best practice management, trialling a different way to do things through using temporary fencing to improve lamb survival. So this was done in 4 properties in across 4 properties in Western Victoria. Where it was trialling splitting up using temporary fencing to make smaller paddocks for twin ewe mob sizes to look at does that improve lamb survival. And this was done over 3 years, and the results were yes, it does. And this is about producers that were committed to trialling something new on their property and allowing other producers to watch them as well. Now, lamb survival in this particular project lifted by nearly 5%. And then for the extra lambs that were born through this trial, over this trial period, the return on investment was extraordinary at just over 300%. So acknowledging, of course, there's outlay with the fencing materials, but the net benefit that came out of it because of the improved lamb survival, it definitely outweighed the outlay of fencing costs there. And then the project looked at, well, what does it mean beyond the trial? And so the project looked at what's it look like for 10 years, and it estimated that'd be a minimum 8-to-1 cost benefit for adopting or changing the practices to take this on board. Now, I think for me, one of the most important parts of this project was that 100% of the producers that were involved in the project in actually demonstrating to each other this work have adopted this and actually changed what they're doing for longer term. 50% of the observer producers, so those that came and had a looked over the neighbour's fence, if you like, they actually have changed their practices as well. And this is why it's a really effective mechanism of getting research into businesses quickly. The other example I wanted to use was about was a nutritional management approach to sheep performance and lamb survival, and crop grazing was what was looked at here in southern Western Australia across 4 sites. So using crop grazing as a mechanism to defer pastures, but to improve animal performance and whether it would affect lamb survival as well. So answer here was it did all of that. It actually, so sheep, ewes and hoggets were grazed on crops for between 10 and 44 days during winter. Now, as the animals went on to the crops at the start, the crops did offer a high nutritional benefit straight away. But through that deference of the pastures that would have normally just kept grazing, those pastures thrived from that too by actually having a lot more feed on offer once they came back into the rotation after having that spell. I guess both ewes and hoggets actually did have improved performance measured through condition score in this project. But when we talked about lamb survival as my example here today, it actually improved twin lamb survival too, due to the increased birth weights and probably from the actual performance of those ewes during this project as well. Now, not acknowledging in this project, crop yields were actually down by 4% on average. But if we're looking at this a whole business approach here, and that's what this involve and partner strategy is about, is taking a whole of business approach, is that acknowledging the crop yield reduction slightly there, but the improved reproductive performance and the lamb survival and just general animal performance, I mean, the benefits spoke for themselves in this particular case. So these are just two examples where it was producer-led trial work, which is really critical for getting success in this involved partner strategies. That is producers leading the research and demonstrating to each other that this works. Now, lastly, I'd just like to finish on an area that I think is a game changer. It's a part that gets me pretty excited about really accelerating our industry's ability to access research outcomes, and also making a really effective way to have research and adoption working together. And these are these integrated research projects that I spoke about at the very beginning, but I wanted to give you some real examples of where that is happening. And this is really an area that I think believes does deserve our increased attention and efforts here. And we do these in partnerships it might be with producer groups, it might be with state departments, it might be with other stakeholder groups or advisors. And the 4 examples I'm just going to use that are actually up and going now, and you'll hear more about these over their life of the projects because they do go on for a number of years and you'll hear it through the various MLA channels. And the first one is the Northern Australian Pain Relief Project, where we'll have 6 sites across the Northern Territory that are going to be looking at what are the welfare and production benefits from using analgesics during times of castration and dehorning. We'll be looking at going down south now to non-wetting sand types. And this project will actually look at over 1 million hectares in this project that are of the non-wetting sand type, and which can be quite limiting in productivity. So looking at what amendments could you make to that soil type or interventions to improve pastures resilience and water retention. We're going to have a project that is up and going focused on the rangelands. Again, a massive amount of area that will be impacted in this trial with over another 1 million hectares that are involved in this. And that's looking at how do you balance animal productivity, grazing practices, water and natural resource management in this particular part of the world. And lastly, an example that's focused on genetics, where looking at how do we accelerate the rates of genetic gain through using the new technologies that are available now to producers, meaning genomics and a greater use of using DNA to optimize breeding decisions. So these are just a couple of examples of those integrated research projects that are up and going. And the most important part of this is that there is a clear line of sight to adoption from the very beginning of starting these projects, and producers are involved the entire way along. So I hope that gives you some insight into some of the exciting approaches we're taking to adoption to make sure our stakeholders get the greatest access to our research as quickly as possible, so we get that return on investment as quickly as possible. Thank you, Mick.
Thanks very much, Sarah. And not a bad segue into our next speaker with the last focus area of Sarah's was improving the rate of genetic gain. And here we have Hamish Chandler, the program manager for genetics, to take us through some of the key progress that is being made in the genetics area. And Hamish, I'll hand over to you to take us through where you're up to.
Thanks, Mick. Good afternoon, everyone. I guess where I wanted to start was really thinking about what areas can livestock genetics influence resilience. So I think there's probably several major areas where we can use genetics to influence resilience. So I think you can think of it at the level of business resilience. So how do we improve productivity, quality of products, decrease cost of production using genetics to have an impact on the profitability of our businesses? How do we influence the resilience of our production systems? So for example, can we improve reproductive rates so that when we are reducing stock numbers during a dry season, we're able to bounce back in following years because of that better reproductive rate? Or resilience of the livestock themselves. So what can we do looking at muscle and fat to improve animals' ability to maintain body condition score through tough years? All of these things can be factors we can influence. I guess given I'm only speaking for a short period of time, I was really going to focus on the business aspect of that. And look, just as a reminder, I guess I often start with, what is it that drives genetic progress, the rate of genetic gain? So it's really selection accuracy, selection intensity, generation interval, and how much variation is out there. What's that mean? Well, we need to pick the best animals. We need to think about what proportion of animals are being retained in a breeding program, breeding from them as soon as we can to get new genes into our businesses, and being able to identify the genetic differences between animals so we can exploit that variation. We all know, I guess, performance of an animal is a combination of the genes that they're carrying and the environment they're running in. So what we're really trying to do is identify which animals have the best genes in a breeding context so they can pass them on to the next generation. We know that there's a whole lot of environmental factors that influence how successfully we can do that. So I guess that has an impact on how often am I actually choosing the right animal. We know, I guess, that feed availability has an impact on their performance. If we can account for that and remove that from the equation, then we have a better chance of choosing the right animal more frequently. Similarly, age is going to have a big impact on how heavy a bull is on sale day, for example, or the age of its mother, or the disease and parasite burden that it's had over its lifetime. They're all environmental factors. The more of those environmental factors we can account for and remove out of the equation, the more chance we have got of choosing the right animal on a routine basis, so that we make sure that we're picking the best animal to pass on genes to the next generation. I guess just to join the dots a little bit about where genomic information or DNA information assists us in that. How do we use genomic information? For genomics to work, we obviously have to have a reference population. So somewhere where we're measuring all of the traits that we're interested in and recording genotypes on those animals. Particularly useful for hard to measure traits or late in life traits. I guess the prime example is eating quality traits, because animals don't breed very well after you've measured those traits. So you look at the information you've collected in the reference population, the patterns you see associated with the genomic samples. Then when we test young animals out in industry, we can use those patterns to predict the breeding values for the traits that we've measured in the reference population. I guess across the genetics program at the moment, we've got in excess of 40 projects in place, research projects in place. A number of them are reference population projects. There's many examples, I guess, for the sheep side. The main example is the resource flock. On the beef side, there's a number of examples. And I guess one that I wanted to use to just reinforce the point a little bit, the work that's being done in the Angus sire benchmarking project that we co-fund with Angus Australia. This slide comes out of the most recent data that Angus Australia has collected in that project. And it's just a way of summarising how effectively EBVs are providing, how accurately the prediction of genetic merit is being represented, I guess. So what this slide shows us is what was the expected difference that you would see for all of these different sires that are being used in this project at the start of when they were selected, And how does that compare to the outcome that was actually measured in the progeny that were born as part of the project? So as I said, this has been updated with the most recent cohorts of calves that have gone right through the system, right through to slaughter. If you use 600-day weight there as an example, based on the sire breeding values, from the best performing sires through to the lower performing sires, you would have expected at 600 days of age, those steers had about a 21 kilo difference from the better performing sires through to the lower performing sires. In actual fact, once the data had all been collected and collated, you could see there that the actual performance of those steers varied by about very close to 20 kilograms. So it blows my mind in many ways that 2.5 years before you were able to measure the performance in those steers, we'd predicted within 1.2 kilos the outcome of those different matings. So to my mind, that's a very accurate prediction of what was going to result from those breeding decisions. Another example, I guess, to quickly look at, carcass intramuscular fat percentage. The predicted difference for those steers was 1.3%. The actual measured difference was 1.5%. So I guess, again, some evidence to support the fact we can use this information to improve our productivity traits and our quality of product, our value determining traits at the same time. The biggest thing for you as producers is to understand which traits are important to my business, which traits are going to drive my profitability the most, and how do I go about using the relevant EBVs to make progress for those things that actually matter to my business. Another example is the Repronomics project that's been run in the north. The first phase of that project has been completed, and we've just started on the second round of that project. So I guess to this point in time, we're seeing about 5,600 animals have been genotyped and phenotyped for a range of traits so far. And those phenotypes include some really difficult, hard to measure traits that it's not feasible to measure in people's businesses. So things like age of puberty for heifers and lactation and estrus intervals in cows. How do we collect data that can then be used to improve our reproduction trait accuracies? So the outcomes of the Repronomics project have been really central in the Brahman single-step breed plan analysis being launched in recent years. But it's also meant that we've got much improved days to calving EBVs for the three tropical breeds that have been involved in that project to date, Brahmans, Santa Gertrudis, Droughtmaster. Going forward, the new version of that project will also include tropical composites. So across those three breeds so far, we've seen both an improvement in the number of animals that have got reproduction breeding values available, and we've also seen an improvement in the accuracy of those breeding values. So that has a direct impact on how quickly producers can select for reproduction traits and see an improvement in their businesses. The bull that you see a photo of there was a bull that has gone through Rockhampton Brahman Week sales. The interesting thing for me is the benefit of this project means that that bull went through the sales with a full set of breeding values available. And if you look at the line there that says traits observed, we didn't have a bunch of weight measurements, scan measurements, carcass measurements to derive all of that information. That bull simply had a genomic test and some knowledge of some of his pedigree. So outcomes of these sort of projects are really leading to tangible benefits in how do we identify variation, how do we select animals more accurately, and how do we allow producers to make more progress for traits that are important to their bottom line. Following on, I guess, from the success of the Repronomics project, we've now partnered with New South Wales DPI, AGBU and UNE to create and initiate the Southern Multi-Breed Project. So doing similar things to the Repronomics project, but to create a multi-breed data set for temperate breeds. So we've got Angus, Charolais, Hereford, Shorthorn, Wagyu and Brahman cattle included, the Brahmans, to give it a link back through to that repronomics project. So irrespective of the colour of these animals, how do we go about collecting those hard to measure traits to build a database that enables us into the future to run multi-breed genetic evaluations, so breeders can choose the bull that is most profitable, that's the best suited to their business, irrespective of breed type. So in terms of outcomes so far, there's 2,000 cows across 5 sites that the New South Wales DPI are running. The first of those cohorts of calves are on the ground now, and the second round of AI is well underway. And all of those animals will be genotyped and intensively phenotyped for the full range of traits, the standard growth traits, reproduction traits, including gestation length, age of puberty, that sort of thing, and also carcass traits, eating quality traits, and others. So I guess in conclusion, to wrap it all up, it is really possible to use genetic information to improve the resilience of our businesses and the profitability of our businesses, you know, increasing productivity, increasing the quality of product, decreasing cost of production. The challenge for you as producers is to work out which traits are the ones that are really important for profitability in your businesses, and how do you go about using the breeding values to make as much progress as for those traits as you can. Because at the end of the day, breeding values mean making the right choice more often. Thanks, Mick. I'll wrap it up there.
Thanks, Hamish. There's plenty of great snippets there of the investments that you're making in genetics. Please don't hesitate to send through your questions, add them into the Q&A. We'll get on to the panel session shortly. It's with great pleasure I now introduce Professor Phil Vercoe from the University of Western Australia. He's going to now take us through an example of how a strategic partnership approach is helping make progress, and using a WA example. But Phil, I'll hand over to you, and we're in your hands.
Thanks very much, Mick. I appreciate it very much. And just thanks to the organisers for giving me the opportunity to talk about one of these strategic partnerships, or an example of one. I must admit I was sold on the power of the partnership concept through the Reducing Emissions from Livestock Research Project, and also the National Livestock Methane Project, where groups came together. It was probably one of the most exciting times of my research career in that sort of 6 to 7 years, and it's I think a fantastic thing that type of approach is now being extended further and having an even closer link and relationship to producers. So thanks very much for the opportunity. I genuinely believe that the strategic partnerships can accelerate adoption, mainly because of its, you know, if it's done right, it brings together representatives from across the supply chain. We cannot be working in isolation. None of us can be working in isolation, or I think we just won't accelerate the program. And these partnerships allow us to do that. And they have to be involved from the planning to practice. It's as clear as that partnership must start in the planning process, in the planning phase, and be taken right through and followed through right to the practice phase. And there must be a spirit of collaboration in that partnership. And that spirit of collaboration comes through communication and, of course, a coordination of a program of work. So people feel part of that program, that they've felt part of the development of that program, and along for the ride. Next slide, please, Lauren. Thanks. And so the WA Beef Links partnership strategy is what I'll focus on today. And I won't be going into the particulars of the R&D projects in the program. It's really just about the structure and what we're trying to build and develop, and why we're trying to do that. But at the heart of it is to integrate the R&D activities across Northern WA to increase beef production from rangeland systems and grow value chain opportunities. But at its core, it is a focal point where we can share information, encourage and attract co-investment, and communicate across the supply chain. And that co-investment comes through having a clear plan that has been developed by a partnership with people who have been engaged right from the start. So we've got a clear map of the types of things that need to be done to be able to develop the northern beef industry in WA, for example. Next slide, please. And the links, we put a little bit of thought into beef links. It sounds pretty simple, beef links. You might have thought I thought that up as I was typing away on the computer, but we thought about it, and the links is really critical. At the end of the day, it is all about links. It's linking R&D and A activities, so there's continuity between old programs, new programs, changed programs, but in particular to get some continuity across or along a line of research that's been defined or identified as a clear key to progressing the industry in whatever region you happen to be in. The link is also with other strategic partnerships. So we've heard about LPP and NB2, Repronomics, there's the Animal Welfare Collaborative, and new state and federal initiatives that will be coming up and will be announced, I think, NLMP2 from MLA. These are all major strategic partnerships that also shouldn't work in isolation. And so it's really important that BeefLinks is engaged in communicating their results and hearing about results from these other programs, because at the end of the day, it is about connecting the genotype and the environment and management, no matter where you are. It's also about having some connection between the research councils, the RACs, Walrick, NABRIC, Solric. If we look at WA, a big state, we've actually got cattle coming down from the north to the southern regions, and it actually crosses the NABRIC, Walrick boundaries, if you like. And so it's really important, and I think an important strength, that we also bring those RACs together, and Solric also have some interest in cattle movement from north to south. So there's lots of opportunities there, and they have to be connected. We've got connection between key producer and grower groups, absolutely essential, particularly for our Western Australian environment, where there is movement and a need for coordination. Critical is the connection between the links between researchers and producers. Researchers are very much part of the industry and must be working with producers and vice versa in a partnership. And really critical is students in industry. And I think I genuinely believe that without a critical mass of youth going into the future, we're done. And I think we need to have a big focus on that. Next slide, please. So just very quickly, what we did in developing BeefLinks, right from the start, we had, obviously it was a partnership between UWA and MLA from a funding perspective, but we got all of the key grower groups, the DPIRD, which is our state department, producers, Rio Tinto, Pardue Station are two key players in the pivot irrigation scene, which is developing here in the north, and Polly Treeford, who had expertise across the whole supply chain, and Select Carbon, who have an eye on the carbon opportunities in the beef production in rangelands. We went through 2 workshops that were sort of half day to full day workshops, and came up with a strategy framework about the roadmap that group, that development committee, felt were key things that needed to be coordinated and capitalised on, both from a research and an adoption perspective. Next slide, please. I actually had the SOAP on a page, which was too much really to put into this. It's there. It is the roadmap, if you like, and it covers a whole range of things that this initial partnership won't be able to manage in one hit. We'll need to attract other partners into it, but it is still a roadmap there of the key things that will drive beef production and the supply chain from the Kimberley, a vast area of land from the Kimberley right down into the southern systems of beef production in WA. But that strategic development committee came up with the vision. I won't go through all of that again. It's very much like the first slide. It had a goal, and that was done through various processes trying to put the different programs and thoughts and ideas through Adopt to try and get a decent sense of what was reasonable and feasible if we get it right. It was critical that there was an integration of R&D and adoption and extension activities across the whole supply chain. And there is a mosaic in the north of feed-based, but there's a mosaic on about 3 or 4 different levels that needs to be brought together, which can only happen if we communicate and share. Obviously, the linking is what we've just spoken about in the previous slide. That is the central core to the partnership, is making sure people are on the same page and following things through, commenting on it, discussing it, developing it, modifying it, and adapting. Next slide, please. That development committee became a steering committee, and that steering committee then has an oversight, a say, a communication, an awareness activity that is across all of the projects that fall under that umbrella that is BeefLinks. At the moment, we've got these projects that are going. Every project that we've got 2 more at least that we'll be putting through together that we think fills part of the initial phase that we want to cover. And I guess I said I won't go into each of these 4 projects there that are R&D based about science and in-field measurement and engagement with producers in key areas that absolutely drive the supply chain across it here in the West. But the thing I wanted to focus on is that there is also a project, we're calling it a research project, which is a socio-economic and adoption project that sits under everything that we do in this program. And that project, I call it a project because I'm not a social scientist, but we've got good social scientists in the world and certainly locally, and we're engaging them to help us not only do the monitoring, the planning and supporting of these sorts of programs, but also to do some clever social science research so that we can move our thoughts and our ideas and approaches ahead on that front as well. But they are also going to be very much responsible for the planning and coordinating of those links outwardly to LPP, to Repronomics, to NB2, to the most recent state government program that's just been announced. Next slide, please. No, sorry, I'm really just there now at the end. I just wanted to reiterate that I genuinely believe the strategic partnerships are such a powerful and clever way to go forward. You absolutely have to have people from the industry, from all parts of that supply chain involved from planning to practice. And there must be a spirit of collaboration and a view to help industry, 100%. And I guess that I just believe that we build resilience through connection, communication, and innovation. And really that's what these strategic partnerships deliver, and certainly they're what they are built on. Thanks, Mick, very much.
Thanks very much, Phil. That's it's a great overview, and we'll get into a little bit of discussion shortly about the interaction with the strategy and the investment through strategic partnerships. As we're now setting up for the Q&A for a panel discussion, we've got a few questions here to get through. You will see to all the participants on the call, you will see a link in the chat pop up. It's a link to the survey. You will also get a link to that survey post the webinar if you don't get to do it before we close today. But if you do have a chance to click on that and open that up in your browser, we would most appreciate your feedback. So we'll jump in now into the panel session, and Phil, Hamish, and Sarah, we've got a few questions here, and I thought I might start with one that I'll get each of you to have some input to. Look, the comment was the whole farm system approach is laudable. To what extent are MLA looking at interactions holistically? For example, genotype by management, by environment interactions, to identify more combinations over the long term. So Hamish, I might go to you first. You touched on the work you're doing in genetics. How are you connecting those investments in genetics to the rest of the farm system? Might be a decent context to start with.
Yeah, okay, Mick. So I guess obviously on a genotype by interaction, genotype by environment interaction basis, we do obviously capture data from a number of different environments, different production systems. So some of the, say, Repronomics project, it runs across 2 or 3 different sites. The DPI project for Southern Multibreed runs across 5 different sites. Breed plan evaluation captures data from many different sites, many different production systems. In general, genotype by environment interactions aren't all that big for most of our key production traits. They are there for some traits. We are aware of those. I guess from a bull buyer or from a user perspective, you know, if you can source, especially if you're in an extreme environment, selecting animals that have been raised in a comparable environment will give you some comfort there. But it really comes back more to, you know, how do we select the right genotypes to, with the right balance of traits, I guess, to achieve our goals in our production systems. And, you know, that's largely handled, I guess, by our indexes, dollar indexes, and how you sort of build those indexes for particular production systems. We then also make sure that at the research level that where we can overlay various things across different projects we do. So say a lot of the resource reference population projects do then tie into data that goes through to the MSA program for research and development, through to the adoption program for information to support adoption projects as well. So not sure I've 100% answered the question, but there's a number of elements behind it, I guess, that we do take into account when we are pulling projects together.
Sarah, packaging that up through the adoption program, how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, I think those 2 producer demonstration site examples I had, actually good examples of taking a whole business approach. So if you actually, the reports for those projects are pretty comprehensive and are on the MLA website, and you'll see that they actually measure, so we're validating research that's coming out of a somewhat controlled environment and putting it into real practice. And then the measurements that are being taken on all of those demonstration sites are, what does it mean for the animal? What does it mean for pasture? What does it mean for the business itself? So I think the adoption projects really do try and bring all of those things together. Those integrated research projects, they also, I guess, are not looking at just connecting producers into the research, but something that I feel quite strongly about, which Phil spoke about, is actually connecting the recipient of the benefits of that out the other end, so the customer as well. So I think that's how we also get that whole supply chain approach through those projects as well.
Thanks, Sarah. And Phil, how do you, your response to that in terms of the strategic partnership approach?
Yeah, thanks, Mick. And I think it's a great point. And maybe if I start firstly by saying, I think the partnerships and the communication between the partnerships is critical to addressing that G by E by M. I just wanted to say I couldn't agree more. To me, in my mind, the G by E by M means, and it's not just animals, it's having the right plants and animals in the right place, managed in the right way. And we've got projects going on that are focused around managing feed base. We've got projects going on around improving genetics in different environments, so trying to pull that together. And unless we chat across these different programs, it's going to be very difficult to optimize G by E by M in the particular regions where you need to be optimized. It's not one size fits all. So I'm very much about the right animals and plants in the right place, managed in the right way. I think that's a really key driver.
Thanks very much, Phil. The next question is for you, Sarah. Sarah, the R&D adoption map that you put up shows that a lot of the work in Queensland is occurring along more coastal regions or close to the coast. Is there a reason for that? And the second part to the question is, you said that not much of Australia is left that hasn't been included. However, there seems to be a gap, or however, the map shows not much of Queensland has been covered. Can you clarify that a bit more for us, please?
Yeah, sure. Look, that's a really good question, a good observation on that map. And probably should clarify the dots that were shown on that map are based off where is either the host of that producer demonstration site or that profitable grazing systems package. So that could, in some cases, represent a coach that might be leading that project, or it could be a host of a set of producer demonstration sites. So it is worth clarifying that that's what those points meant. But also to that point, that each one of those dots would actually also expand quite a way out into Queensland, and we do have quite a few projects that are getting into western and more remote areas of Queensland. I think the other part to the question was, what are we doing about the gaps, I guess. Also, the other changes that have happened in the last little while in the adoption program is the PDS program, which again, the way to get involved in that is on the MLA website, and producers can come forward with ideas on that. We've made that a little bit more flexible as well, to be able to be more suitable to extensive parts of Northern Australia. So we have, and with those changes in the last little while, we've seen where we had one PDS project in Northern Australia, that's actually expanded to now there are 11 in that have come through recently, and there's another 2 that are about to kick off over the next few months. So since our flexible approach to adoption is actually is well received, because we're getting increased there, and we've got a dedicated coordinator in Queensland for profitable grazing systems as well, that is really looking for what are new training packages that could be developed. And an example of that is, there's one now dedicated or has developed out of consultation in Queensland on satellite foraging, and a few others in the pipeline to come through too.
Thanks very much for that, Sarah. Hamish, one for you. When will the industry have the confidence to purchase livestock without a photo of the animal?
I love the question, Mick. Very good question. And look, I think in a strange way, COVID travel restrictions have probably helped move the industry in that direction quite rapidly over the last few months. Ram selling and bull selling season underway without people being able to travel has meant people are relying more on objective information. But the other part of that, I would say, really comes back to what is it that's in your breeding objective, what's important to your business, and do we have breeding values available for all of those traits? So if there are breeding values available, excellent, we can manage it in a much more accurate way that way. If there are structural traits or wool color traits, for example, that because of the environment you're running in that are important to your business, we don't yet have breeding values available because of limited data or something, then it's still valid to go and look at animals and make sure that those traits are going to tick the box that you need. So accuracy of selection is going to apply, whether it's just visually assessed, whether it's just a weight or something like that. So if it's just a visual assessment, your accuracy of selection is going to be a bit lower. But if you don't have better information to work on, it's still a valid thing to do.
Thanks, Hamish. There's no doubt some of the livestock trading platforms have come into their own this year, and uptake's been stronger than ever through the ram and bull selling seasons. Look, I might get each of the panelists to contribute to this next one, just from your perspectives. And the question is, can producers actually initiate and lead research projects? And if yes, how do they navigate the ethical standard application and funding governance requirements without the systems in place for them to do that? It's certainly something we've discussed quite a bit internally. Sarah, do you want to go first on that one?
Yeah, so I guess, can producers initiate and lead research projects? Absolutely, they can, and that's, you know, a really fundamental, I think, to success for the adoption program, and getting runs on the board for getting research into producers' businesses. And the producer demonstration site is a perfect example of producers initiating that and leading that. Yeah, some of those projects involve treatments to animals that happen outside normal practices. Just that's the idea with that. We're trialing, validating research, and where groups are connected to research organisations, where that support can be provided, is recommended. And then I think, Mick, you mentioned where we're looking at how do we continue to support producers to be able to keep doing those things with that in mind, because it's actually fundamental to success of getting adoption and practice change.
Thanks, Sarah. Phil, have you got a view?
Yeah, I do, Mick. I'm just, what I'm not sure about is exactly how it works from state to state. Sometimes, even though the code is there, there are different options available, I think, to about getting animal ethics clearance. At this stage, we haven't come across a situation where we can't have, for us, it could be a grower group, for example, as opposed to an individual producer or a group of producers, but it's a similar principle. And we've actually driven those, we haven't been driving them, we've been working with that group to actually tweak some of the ways in which it might be done. So again, that's been a really useful communication, but then we've put it through our own animal ethics committee, through the university, and also have a capacity to be able to administer you know, the finances on that. And that suits, or it has suited so far. I think that there are other possibilities, you know, where they could actually work with the state authorities around getting those sorts of clearances. And I think that's also absolutely feasible, but it's not easy. And that's where, you know, the combination of researchers with producers or grower groups is really valuable, because it's not a simple thing to get animal welfare and ethics approval. You know, there's a real degree of thought and you know, planning and you know, statistical assessments that are expected in a lot of these things that, you know, I think that's where the researchers and research institutions can be valuable, no matter where the ethics approval comes from. And again, that to me is a valuable thing that the producers can gain from collaborating with the researchers. Yeah, I'm not sure if that helps or not, but at the moment, that's how we've been managing it.
That's really good, Phil. Thanks so much for that. And Hamish, you've had some experience working with producer-led R&D. How have you handled that?
Yeah, so I think Sarah and Phil have probably covered a lot of it. It's a matter of, but it's a matter of how do individuals choose to engage with the process. So if you are engaging as an individual entity in your own right, then yeah, there is going to be some additional work involved in making sure that things can comply. But is it possible to engage as a group, as a formal association, or, you know, participate in a different way through you know, activities that larger research organisations are running? So there's a range of different ways to do it. I guess from a genetics program specific perspective, you know, a lot of our work, as I said before, is really around capturing reference population information and that sort of thing. So I think there's a number of ways that we can look at doing that. There's the formal structured research projects like I have been discussing, through to data capture on commercial animals, that we're doing a lot of that anyway. It does have an impact on heritability and accuracy, so we would need a lot more of that sort of data than you would for something out of a structured project. But it does open the door for us to engage with breeders, with producers in different ways, depending on how we can structure projects to capture information of varying degrees of quality, or of, from structured versus more commercial sorts of data sets. So I think there's a few options there. One is how we engage in terms of what sort of entities we engage with. The other is how do we actually design projects that make it easier for people to capture information or participate in research.
Thanks very much, Hamish.
Sorry.
Oh
Ted,
yeah, Phil, go for it.
Just one other thing that, I just reflecting on the question, what's really been interesting and valuable from the researcher's perspective, but I think just generally about the whole area of welfare and ethics, is that when we've worked with the producers to go through and put an application together, the level of detail, what it actually takes to get those applications through and what the expectations are, has really built an awareness about, where these bars are set and what actually has to happen. So the general awareness of animal welfare and ethics through that partnership in putting these applications together has been quite an education in itself. So I think that's quite a valuable thing to have, to be honest.
Thanks very much, Phil. I'm just conscious of time. We've come to the end of our allotted time in the webinar, but please thanks very much to our panelists. Really appreciate your time and input today. I'll now hand back to Jason for the closing of the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mick, and Sarah, Hamish and Phil. It was fantastic. What a great start, and certainly set the bar pretty high for the other four that are following. So thank you everybody for tuning in. And I think some of the key messages around our extension and adoption is about getting information sooner, getting information that can be applied, and processes and solutions that can be applied, but information and solutions that are going to be impactful as well. And I think that that temporary fencing around lambing is a fantastic example of how you're able to demonstrate something which can be applied immediately, and the uptake of that sort of thing is a great example of the type of work that we want to be doing and getting out to people as quickly as we can. And this important bit about leveraging the investments that we're making and the work that we're doing with other people, other organisations, other groups, so we can get the maximum benefit from the resources being invested, but also the maximum input from the results that come out of that. So I think it's been a great start to the series, and thanks very much to the team for getting prepared and getting it underway. So thanks everyone for tuning in. I hope it's been valuable information for everyone. Don't forget there's 4 others to follow, and the annual general meeting as well, it'll come along later in the month. And the website, so the website that's covering all this information, updates.mla.com.au, is where you can register for those other webinars as well. This one's been recorded, as the others will be, and they'll be loaded up to the website in the next 48 hours, as will the answers to the questions that didn't get covered in today's session. As Mick already mentioned, we'd also appreciate you filling in the survey if you wouldn't mind, and giving us some feedback so we can tweak and improve as we go with this series. So thanks everybody for making the time. We really appreciate you doing that and tuning in, and hopefully it's been informative and helpful for everybody. Thank you, and look forward to seeing you at one of the other seminars.